Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Women Trailblazers at UW Medicine. My name is Shaveta Vinayak, and I'm an assistant professor of oncology at UW Medicine. I'm a breast cancer medical oncologist, and I see patients at the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. I'm really excited to have a conversation today about what it means to be a woman trailblazer in science. I can think of no better trailblazer than my mentor and friend, Dr. Nora Disis. Nora Disis is one of the most lauded female scientists in breast cancer immunology. Nora is originally from Chicago. She received her MD from University of Nebraska, completed her residency at the University of Chicago, and then moved to Seattle to do her fellowship at UW-Fred Hutch. Nora had only planned to stay in the Pacific Northwest for a few years, but then decided to stay for much longer. She calls UW School of Medicine as her candy store for science and has formed wonderful research collaborations here. And that was one of her most compelling reasons to stay. Her many titles include Director of the Cancer Vaccine Institute, Associate Dean of Translational Science, Helen B. Slonaker Endowed Professor for Cancer Research, and Adjunct Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology and Pathology. In addition to her impressive resume, Nora Disis is a true teacher and mentor. We met initially at the Vail Workshop in Colorado in 2014. She was a wonderful mentor to me during that workshop, and we have continued our wonderful scientific relationship since then and have now followed her all the way to Seattle. Many of you joining us this afternoon submitted questions when you registered to attend. Today, I'll be asking Nora as many of those questions as we have time for. Nora, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. For those guests who are hearing from you for the first time, can you please provide a quick overview of the Cancer Vaccine Institute at UW Medicine?
Thanks, Shrita. The Cancer Vaccine Institute at UW Medicine is the largest academic laboratory in the United States focused specifically on developing cancer vaccines. We have over 30 members, a very diverse group from basic scientists all the way to clinicians, and the group encompasses about 6 faculty members, all working together on different parts of tumor immunology. We're probably best known for our work in the development of vaccines targeting breast and ovarian cancer. And those vaccines are what we call therapeutic vaccines. I mean, we're used to getting vaccines before the development of disease. But in cancer, we also develop vaccines to give once people have had cancer to hopefully prevent cancer recurrence. And we also develop vaccines, or recently started, to even prevent the development of cancer, like you'd prevent the development of COVID, let's say. The reason why we're able to do this is there's been so many technologic advances in the field of immunology and genomic medicine. 10 years ago, from the idea of a vaccine to setting foot in a clinical trial for the first time, probably took 6 to 8 years. Now, we can do that in 1 year. So that has really caused an explosion of research in the Cancer Vaccine Institute.
That's wonderful. Well, your career has been truly remarkable. So tell us about how you went from being a physician to running a lab and then forming the Cancer Vaccine Institute. And how do you think being a woman affected all that?
Well, I've always been kind of a lab rat. So from the time I was in college, I always had part of myself in some lab or another. When I came out here to study oncology, having gone through medical school and then residency training, I was the only girl in my oncology class, and I entered a laboratory that was really focused on studying whether patients could even mount an immune response against their cancers. So as the only girl in my oncology class, I ended up seeing most of the breast cancer patients. And since I was committed to try to study human immunology, or the human immune response, my patients kind of became my partners in research. So I would go to clinic, I'd have a bunch of blood tubes in one pocket. After we'd finish our clinic visit, I would bring out a consent form and ask if they'd donate blood for my research. And so it became a very collaborative relationship with the patients. So the lab has always been there. I think being a woman has really shaped how I run the lab or the creation of the Cancer Vaccine Institute. When I started in research in a lab, we kind of think of the laboratory doctor as the lone wolf. But usually it's a head guy who's got a lot of workers, and we're working on all aspects of projects. And the labs are generally called the Smith lab or the Jones lab. And as I started being independent, that didn't sit well with me, because everyone can have the aha moment, but it takes a lot of people to shape that aha moment into something tangible. And it's really the tangible thing that counts. And I thought, I don't know how motivated people would be to be in the Disis lab, because what you really want is passionate people who are all working together on a shared goal. And so when it came time for me to kind of start my own lab, I made up a name called the Tumor Vaccine Group and hired my first people, and we worked in the Tumor Vaccine Group, and I put that made up name on my resume. And then when I started going out and giving talks, they would say, from the Tumor Vaccine Group. But over time, that idea of a shared laboratory and a shared passion really became the DNA of what now is the Cancer Vaccine Institute. And people want to work there. They want to come and be part of the group because everyone contributes to the science. So I would have to say, out of all my accomplishments, the proudest one I have is the team of researchers that I've been able to assemble now in the Cancer Vaccine Institute. We've discovered more to advance the science of cancer vaccines and their clinical application to people in the last 10 years than we did in my whole career before that. And I couldn't be prouder of them, and I couldn't be more joyful to work with them.
Oh, it's very inspiring. I love that story of you carrying around blood in your pockets.
Yeah, it would freak them out when I'd pull out a baggie and it had like 20 blood tubes in it. I'd really have to talk them into it.
So, thinking about just science as it stands today, what advice would you give young female scientists?
That's kind of a hard question, because I think the world that I was shaped in is very much different from the world for young female scientists today. As an example, I studied breast cancer immunology at the very beginning, before there was breast cancer immunology. And I kind of fell into it serendipitously because those were the patients I saw. When I went to my first major meeting and gave a podium talk about discovering T cells specific for breast cancer antigens in breast cancer patients, I was so excited. I thought of every single question anyone could ask me, and I had written it out. I'd memorized the whole thing, 12 minutes long. When I got to the end of it, this older male scientist rushed to the microphone, and I'm like, I am so ready for this. And he said, why are you studying something so stupid as breast cancer immunology? Breast cancer patients don't have immune responses to their tumors. Why aren't you studying melanoma? That's an immunogenic tumor. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't know what to say. I mean, he wasn't asking about the data, or he wasn't even asking me anything. He was making a statement. And I felt so embarrassed, like it made me question myself a little bit. And when I went back to the lab, I really thought about it. And I thought, you know what? This is where my passion is. I believe this data. I know breast cancer patients have immune responses. And I can say now, 20 years later, breast cancer is immunogenic. It's one of the few solid tumors where immunotherapy has been approved. And what's more, I recently gave a talk at an East Coast school where the person who invited me there introduced me as the mother of breast cancer immunology. So it kind of validated that if you have a passion for something, stay focused. Don't let anyone shake you from that. Be fearless and focused, and go with that passion no matter what. So even now, like today, people ask me, COVID, are you developing a COVID vaccine? And everyone I know who's in the field of tumor immunology who works on vaccines is clamoring to get some money from NIH because the money's there for COVID vaccines. And for us, we aren't even tempted by that. Our goal, our mission, our focus is to end cancer. That's a big goal. We're not going to let anything take us away from achieving that goal. There's lots of brilliant minds out there trying to develop a COVID vaccine. So we're going to stay focused and stick with what we know, and hopefully at the end of it, end up with really making some progress against this disease.
That's incredible advice. So follow your passion and stay focused, and I'll definitely take that to heart too. So tell us what you're trying to accomplish at the Cancer Vaccine Institute at UW.
At the Institute, we're really trying to develop vaccines for 3 reasons. The first reason, the initial type of vaccine that we developed, is vaccines directed against immunogenic portions of cancer that you could give to patients once they had treatment and they were free of disease to help prevent cancer from recurring. Because for many tumors like breast, ovarian, lung cancer, that's one of the major problems. The second thing that I never thought I'd be working on is the development of vaccines that could be given along with chemotherapy. Recent data from the Institute as well as other groups have shown that having a very robust immune response can actually help the effects of chemotherapy. So that's a new area for us. But probably the most exciting new area for us is really contemplating and generating vaccines that will potentially even prevent the development of cancer through the marriage of genomic medicine and immunology. By looking at proteins that become upregulated early in the cancer process and trying to target those proteins with the immune system to prevent cancer from even developing. And the Institute now, which started with breast and ovarian cancer, is working on lung cancer, prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer, sarcoma. So there's so much activity around not only the development of vaccines, but looking at how to use vaccine-primed T cells to treat cancer, using the immune system to diagnose cancer, and also creating other forms of immune therapy to make vaccines work better. So it's a very energized group of people because along with our laboratory scientists, we have our clinical scientists right in the same space. So whatever comes out of the laboratory, they design clinical trials and take it directly to the clinic to treat patients.
So do you think we'll actually have a vaccine for cancer to prevent a cancer in the next decade or so?
It will be a tall task, but I do think it's possible. And it's possible not only due to our increased understanding of what type of immune response we need to eradicate cancer, and also the best technologies with vaccines to deliver that type of immune response, but also the very precision identification of high-risk patients, those patients that are most likely needing a vaccine to prevent the development of cancer. So when you think about vaccines we use now, we really vaccinate everyone, especially because when you look at infections, they really run rampant and everyone can be exposed to an infection. But cancer doesn't operate that way. Not everyone will develop cancer. In fact, it's really a set group of people who will go on and develop cancer. So as we learn more and more about the genetic risk or the behavioral risks that really put people in that higher category, we'll be using vaccines to immunize really those patients at higher risk, which will allow us faster answers whether the vaccine works and really a targeted population with the most benefit. So I think the design of clinical trials in this very precise fashion will overcome a hurdle that's prevented prophylactic cancer vaccines from really making their mark.
Well, all this incredible research takes a lot of funding. So how do you think, from your perspective, can we optimize the role of funding for cancer research?
That's a great question. And funding for cancer research is really hard. You write a grant, you spend about a year waiting to hear whether you get the grant, and you many times have less than a 20% chance of getting that grant. I think people would be surprised to know that physicians like me who do research spend 75 to 80% of our time finding grants and writing grants. You know that too. But I think one of the funding methods that has really made us be able to break through has been the funding we get from philanthropy, because that gives us a lot of flexibility. And I'll give you an example. We're trying to develop an ovarian cancer vaccine that can be given with adjuvant chemotherapy. Ovarian cancer is a very aggressive disease. It's remarkable because people can completely respond to surgery and chemotherapy and be disease-free. But most ovarian cancer patients, the risk of relapse is really quite high. In animal models, we showed giving the vaccine along with chemotherapy would completely prevent the disease from coming back. And so we created a multi-antigen vaccine directed against ovarian cancer, and we were ready to manufacture it. And right at the point we were ready to manufacture it, in the infectious disease world, some new understanding of vaccine manufacture became available, and we pulled the plug. And we really wanted to determine whether we could optimize our vaccine using these very sophisticated tools. And a donor came forward and gave us some seed funding that allowed us to do the experiments to create 4 or 5 different vaccines with these newer methods and test them in animal models. And we found that these new methods really dramatically improved the ability of the vaccine to stimulate an immune response. We would have gone into clinic with a very suboptimal vaccine without that donor support. Another example is, over time, the National Institute of Health has really stopped funding within an individual grant application the manufacture of a vaccine. They'll fund a clinical trial, but you have to come in with your vaccine already manufactured. And there are very few places where you can get funding for not a scientific question. You're really trying to make a reagent. And so we've had some wonderful donors, really grassroots folks, like Valley Girls and Guys. They're a local group in my neighborhood that raise money for cancer research. And they heard about us and they gave us funding to make this ovarian cancer vaccine. And so now that we have the vaccine, we'll be able to move forward and actually have that vaccine manufactured and then be able to go to the government, the National Institute of Health, and write a grant for a clinical trial. And we would never be able to move forward like that unless we had wonderful donors who are moved by the type of work we do and come forward and become our collaborators in the Cancer Vaccine Institute.
Those are wonderful examples of how philanthropic funds can have such a great impact on research. So being in clinic, a lot of patients ask me, do we think that we'll ever have a cure for cancer? And what do you think of that?
Well, it's a common question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. And I have to say, since I'm way older than you, Shaveta, from when I was a resident treating cancer to now, it's a completely different world, right?
Of course.
Cancers that would have killed people are now either curable or they're chronic diseases. Things like chronic myelogenous leukemia. We used to treat it with very aggressive therapy. Now people take a pill. Many breast cancers are completely curable. You even look at advanced stage disease, like advanced stage melanoma, which now standard of care is treatment with immune therapy. You look at someone like President Carter, who's been battling metastatic melanoma for almost a decade. 10 years ago, that would have been a death sentence. He just celebrated his 95th birthday. I mean, that's wonderful. I can't pinpoint when there's going to be a cure for cancer, but we've certainly made incredible strides, more than I would have ever dreamed possible, in eliminating certain types of cancers or making them a chronic disease. And that's why I think the work at the Cancer Vaccine Institute is so important, especially the work in trying to prevent disease relapse and to prevent the development of disease. And I think with what's happening in better treatments and targeted treatments, along with now the more sophisticated use of immunotherapy, we may be there sooner than we think.
Well, I'm very hopeful about cancer research as well and what the future holds. So lots of things to look forward to. Now you're considered a trailblazer. So trailblazers don't just usually blaze trails for a couple of years and then sit around and watch Netflix or something. So what's your vision for the Cancer Vaccine Institute and what really motivates you to keep going?
Yeah, that Netflix comment is a good crack because I think The Crown is about to release the next season. So I might check out for a little bit. But I understand your question, Shaveta. I think the next big step for the Cancer Vaccine Institute is really to bring in other trailblazers. And even though you describe yourself as my mentee, I mean, you're a trailblazer in your own right with your work on PARP and looking at the combination of PARP inhibitors, which are very novel agents, and immune therapy, and the clinical trials that you've published certainly are changing the way people are thinking about immunotherapy in diseases like breast and ovarian cancer, especially triple-negative breast cancer. And just like we talked about before we started this conversation, my goal really in the next 10 years is to find people like you and integrate you more into the Cancer Vaccine Institute, because we will only make great strides if we get the best minds into the Institute and we really think disruptively and creatively. And the only way you can do that is by constantly shaking things up. And the best way to shake things up is to bring new people into the mix. That puts everyone kind of slightly off their game, but it also forces people to learn and not get caught into ruts. So we're really looking forward to bring more and more people into the Cancer Vaccine Institute. But we also have many projects that excite me. One of the projects is looking at how we eat impacts how the immune system functions. And we have a very big project about the gut microbiome and how it shapes cancer-specific immune responses that I really have to talk to you about. I also mentioned that we're looking at how the combination of chemotherapy and vaccination actually can slow or turn off cancer growth. And you and I have talked about a clinical trial to try to address that. So
definitely,
we'll be writing a grant soon.
Yes.
And then I'm very excited by looking at all the other work going on in the Institute against all the different cancers that all behave slightly differently from the ones I know best, breast and ovarian cancer. And the patient populations that also are very different from breast and ovarian cancer, and really trying to figure out how to integrate cancer vaccines into the standard of care for those tumors. So I think the Cancer Vaccine Group has been, the Cancer Vaccine Institute has been moving at the speed of light. I would like it to keep moving at the speed of light. And I think that there are more exciting projects to come. And hopefully, like I said before, we will find a cure for the most common types of cancer.
So Nora, you describe yourself as a lab rat. Do you have any interactions with patients?
While most of my time is spent in the lab, I do see patients on our clinical trials, and we have quite a few going on. And that's a joy, because our clinical trials, especially the vaccine trials, which are my focus, really enroll patients who have more advanced stage disease, because we always have a series of trials which are called first in human. And so since those trials are more designed to look at the safety of a vaccine, we enroll patients with more advanced stage cancers. And so when you work with patients like that, you really get to know them. You talk about the immune system. They come back. They usually travel from other places than Seattle to come see you and your team, and you really develop a relationship. So it's wonderful around Christmas to keep getting cards from patients who've been in our clinical trial. And it amazes me, because they had advanced stage cancer, and still 10 years later we're getting cards that they were able to live and see their daughter get married. They saw their first grandkids born. And these cards mean so much to us. They circle through the whole laboratory, because often when patients visit us from outside Seattle and they have time to kill before their next appointment the next day, they'll come to the lab and they'll meet the lab staff. I think that's one of the motivating factors for the laboratory-based science, is scientists, they really see the face of the people that they're working for. So whereas I'm not in clinic like you are and doing the primary treatment of cancer patients, they're always forefront in our thoughts, because they're there every day.
You hear from them, so that's great. What a great story. So Nora, you sound like, of course you've been able to accomplish amazing work scientifically, and how have you been able to balance just life outside of being in the lab and, running clinical trials and all of that? And maybe if you have any advice for our scientists in general, especially female scientists, on balancing work and family. Even I would love to hear that.
Yeah. I would say I'm no role model in that regard. And I'll tell you a story. I was in a panel at one of our major national meetings talking about work-life balance. And we had 3 surgeons and the medical oncologist, me. And the surgeons are talking about, you've got your nanny and you split the time with your husband and all that kind of stuff. And then they got to me. And I said, I have 3 children. And I said, I'm a medical oncologist and I'm a laboratory-based physician. So there was no nanny. I could never afford that. And I don't think I did do a good job with my kids. I mean, I tried to work at work, and when I came home, be at home with my kids. And I really tried to listen to them, and I didn't do work at home. And one of my colleagues gave me great advice that as soon as the kids could travel, I should take them with me to a meeting and walk into the meeting and say, if you want me here, you got to have the kid here too. And I started doing that. And every year, my kids would go with me 1 to 2 meetings, and that was our time together away. But I have a lot of guilt about not being at home, not being able to go at 10 o'clock to their school for the teacher birthday or bake the cupcakes. And when I said that, a girl, young girl, went up to the microphone right away. And so she said, I just want to tell you, because maybe I even got a little teary about it, thinking about it. She said, I had a mom just like you. And she said, my mom did a great job because I want to be just like her. And I bet your kids feel the same way. So don't ever think you did a bad job. just by being who you are. You showed them the type of person they should be. And I'll never forget that girl. And if this goes viral on YouTube, maybe she'll see it.
Maybe she'll see it.
She knows who she is. But it happened several years ago, and it was at a very hard time for me with my kids. And her comment to me kept me going for another decade. And so if she watches this, thank you. But it's tough. But have kids, because they're wonderful. And you can do it. You just do it the way you do it. And don't let anyone tell you you're doing a bad job.
Well, that's great advice, and I hope this girl finds this video and watches it, because she obviously gave wonderful advice and made an impact. So, well, thank you so much, Nora. It's been such a pleasure and honor to be able to talk to you and have this great conversation. So I'm going to turn this over to Christine Chan Anderson at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Christine Chan Anderson, Director for Philanthropy at UW-Medicine. My role is to secure resources for the Cancer Vaccine Institute. Dr. Disis and her team rely on philanthropic support in order to meet their goal of getting vaccines to prevent cancer into the clinic in a decade. I encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions about the needs and the vision of the Cancer Vaccine Institute. Thank you so much to our Trailblazers, Dr. Disis and Dr. Vinayak, for sharing your conversation with us today. What a treat. And thank you to everyone for spending your afternoon with us. Have a wonderful day.